Have you ever thought that every single choice you make affects your life now and in the future? My name is Gerad Kite, and I'm a 5-element acupuncture master and psychotherapist. Over the past 35 years, I've worked with thousands of people coming for help with everything you could ever imagine. What fascinates me the most is what seems to be a distinct lack of awareness around the choices we make and the implications of those choices, for better or for worse. In this podcast series, we're examining the power of choice, that by consciously choosing how we think, how we feel, the actions we take, all shape our lives and our future. So if you're ready for some hard-hitting, heartbreaking interviews with people about their choices, join me here on The Power of Choice. Welcome to episode 2 of this first series that's focusing on the choices people make around fertility and the many different ways to become parents. In this second episode, my first two guests came with some very rare insights into, first of all, the excitement, but also the challenges and the outcomes of adopting. Despite their contrasting experiences, both guests provide honest and sometimes difficult accounts of how adoption has profoundly affected their lives. At the end, I'm joined by a young man who was adopted as a child and shares his extraordinary journey from adoption to adulthood. My first guest is called Gina, and Gina came to me many years ago for general health. She had some anxiety, but it certainly wasn't about having children at that time. She then contacted me later to let me know that she was going through the adoption process, and I was delighted when I finally met her two little girls. So this is my interview with Gina, and I must say she gives a really wonderfully honest and personal and broad view on her experience. Hello, Gina.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Pleasure.
Today we're going to talk about a moment in your life where you made a big choice, a very important one. And I'd love to hear the story of what led you to that moment and what happened after that time.
Yeah. Well, we decided to try for a child. And after a few months, I said to my husband, if this doesn't work out, I think I'd like to adopt.
Well, even after a few months of trying?
Yeah. I think the reason why I suddenly thought it was because we lived next door to a woman who had 4 children that weren't allowed to live with her. So they were 4 young children between sort of the ages of 3 and 8. And they'd visit their mother, but social services had said that they weren't allowed to stay with her and they were only allowed to visit. But these children used to pop in to say hello to us.
Oh, lovely.
And they were so sweet. They were obviously very traumatized, which is probably why they were so sort of open. Obviously had a very strange attachment to their dysfunctional mother. So they'd come and visit. And I think that's what sowed the seeds of thinking I could take those 4 children, put them in the bath, wrap them in towels, put them in clean clothes, and I could do that, is what I thought.
That's really interesting because so many people that I've worked with, the idea of having their own genetic child is the most important thing. So it's curious that you jumped straight to the option that often is further down the line.
Well, I think it just sort of, having met these children, I just felt like I wanted to help them. They were quite sad children. And I just sort of said that, thinking, well, we don't know what's going to happen. And I was never, ever, weirdly, desperate for a baby. I had a career and I thought, well, we'd been married for a few years, let's try. It's, that's what people do and it would be lovely. And I love my husband so much. I would love to have a part of him. But it wasn't very much about me, I didn't think. I didn't feel that need at that time to have a baby, but I did want to care for something.
How old were you?
At that point, I was 35.
Okay.
So I'd had quite a busy career, and then suddenly at 35 thought, we can't delay. We were hoping to have a baby or whatever, at that point, and it wasn't happening. Then we started thinking perhaps we should go to the doctor.
How long was it from starting to try and then thinking about going to a doctor?
Probably a year
Okay.
of consciously, so not like very, very long.
Yeah.
But I didn't have any investigations. But we were told, well, the first thing to do is for my husband to have investigations before I had any.
That's actually quite unusual.
Yes, I know. I mean, that's
Yeah.
right, because normally it would immediately be, which is terrible, the woman.
Yes, exactly.
And so he went and he was tested. And I remember him going off to the doctor to get the results and absolutely not predicting anything. And then he came back from the doctor looking pretty sort of white. And he said, nil point, no sperm,
Absolutely nothing.
nothing.
Wow.
And I sort of was so shocked. It was very, very difficult to take in. And it was like, okay, that's it.
Wow.
No baby. And so I was more upset for him.
Yes.
Because the shock for him, obviously we're both shocked, but I was actually more shocked for him. I wasn't like, oh, I'm never going to have a baby. I was shocked for him. I felt that's so terrible for somebody to find out that that's it. That's the end of that. That's the end of your line.
Devastating.
Yeah, it was devastating for him. And then it was like we went through a sort of a period of just numbness, absolute shock. But this is perhaps not how to do it. Very soon after that, I said, well, that's fine. We'll adopt. I want to do that. And he felt that that was going to be the way forward because we discussed about having donor sperm. And I said, no.
Why was that such a clear no for you?
Because I felt that, why would I want to do that? That would just be me having a baby that wasn't our baby.
At that time, were you in discussions with any kind of support network or people guiding you?
No.
So very lonely then.
Very lonely, but I felt very fortunate that what I felt very fortunate about was that it was definite. So I could have chosen to have donor sperm, but I knew I didn't want to do that because I felt like I wanted to do it together. Whatever the decision was, we would be doing it together and we would have absolute joint responsibility or joint decision. I just felt that it would be something we'd be doing together.
Yes, I completely understand that. This moment of choosing to go down the adoption route, that is huge, isn't it, when we think about everything around that?
It's so huge that you don't think it's going to be so huge.
Right.
Because when you decide, when you think, that's what I'm going to do, there's a sort of excitement and there's a not knowing. That's what we're going to do. And we're going to take a child. And I don't want a baby. I want to take an older child. I want to take a child where they haven't had a chance in life and that I'm going to give back to society. We're so fortunate. We love each other and we've got a lovely house and we've got lovely friends. We've got lovely family and we're going to do this and we're going to give back something. We're going to give part of what we've been so lucky to have.
Was that something that you'd felt prior to this time? Was that important to you, the altruistic?
Only when we'd met these children that visited next door. I hadn't thought of it before.
So that was really the big moment in some ways.
It was that for this part of this decision. And obviously, I don't think whatever anybody says before you do anything, you don't want to hear any negatives or anything. You just are going to make this decision, probably not thinking it through very deeply.
Do you have any regrets about that now, that you didn't want to listen to the negative?
No, I don't have any regrets, because I think that what people's negativity wasn't quite the negativity that I might feel now about the decision. I mean, I don't feel negative about the decision, and I don't regret this. But I think, fortunately, I obviously, on the rebound of this news, made the telephone call very quickly to social services, who were not greatly efficient. So very, very quickly after that first phone call and the first visit from a social worker, I got a call saying that there were two little boys. And because I'm Jewish, turned out randomly, these two little boys were Jewish. And I thought I was going to collapse when she said that there were two boys. And I thought, no, 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 this is too soon. Oh my God, am I going to have two little boys?
I mean, I imagine they must have thought they'd won the jackpot when you guys came along. I mean, you're so perfect as adoptive parents.
They might have at that point, yeah. They might have
Yeah.
thought. But they sort of, it wasn't easy. So, with social services, particularly then, it was so disorganized. Nobody rang me back to get any advice, to get anybody to visit. It took a long time, although that did happen quite quickly, that first visit. But when I said suddenly, it's too soon, I can't, this is too much, I suddenly thought, oh my God, tomorrow we're going to get two little boys.
Yeah.
I feel this is dreadful. This is just too soon and too much. So actually, it was only 3 years after that I made the phone call again. And then the process started of adopting.
I had no idea there was that big gap.
Yes, thank God.
Okay, and in those 3 years, did it stay with you as something you really wanted to do, or was it a coming and going?
It stayed with me. And so the conversation always was, well, if we adopt, I never said the words when we adopt. It was still very much ifs, because it's so complicated adopting. And it certainly was 20 years ago. It was horrible. Social services then were really poor.
Were you actively involved in the process in those 3 years, albeit slowly?
I was, albeit very slowly, because when we went back after the 3 years and said, we're ready to do it, getting anybody to answer any calls then was almost impossible. It was sort of like having the doors closed in front of you, which made me sort of even more determined to do it, because I thought, no, I'm carrying on with this. So we went through our local borough, who were really not very good. And then somebody suggested that we went to an agency. We didn't want to adopt abroad. We wanted to do domestic adoption. Somebody suggested that we go through sort of a religious agency, either Catholic, my husband, or Jewish, myself. I then approached Norwood Fostering and Adoption, which is, I mean, now it's not a Jewish adoption agency, but then it was trying to place Jewish children with Jewish families, but they were very, very rarely had Jewish children. But we just happened to go through the process with that organization, and they were incredibly efficient. And we started the process, which was actually quite quick. We started the assessment in the February, and we were approved to adopt in September.
Wow, that is quick.
So it was really quick. They were very efficient. Then we were approved. We didn't go to the panel where they approve you, but we were approved in the September, and then we could start looking for our children.
Yeah, I just want to jump to that time where this is another big choice, isn't it?
Yes.
Which children do you want to take? Which is quite a bizarre situation to be in, isn't it? Where you actually do get that choice.
Yeah. I mean, it's really bizarre, because when we were going through the process, we were handed magazines of children that wait for adoption.
Yeah.
So you'd have pictures of children waiting for adoption. The only children that were up for adoption were children that were hard to place, which meant that they were older, which was good for we wanted to adopt older children, or children that were disabled. And we felt that we couldn't adopt a child that was disabled because we don't live in a house that would suit that. Lots of stairs but there were lots of sibling groups. So we would go through these magazines. And of course, what happens is those children are photographed and photographed very well. So you'd find yourself falling in love with these photographs.
Yeah.
And I remember there was a family of 5. And I thought, well, we could do it.
Yeah.
We could
Wow.
take a family of, how ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous to think that. But anyway.
Do you remember how you felt at that part of the process? I mean, it must have been quite exciting, I imagine.
Excited and a bit sick.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean.
Yes, I do.
And I'd ring up about a few of the children because you could ring and see where, what borough where they were placed. And it was pretty horrible in a way because it just felt very strange. But in the November of that year, our social worker from Norwood Fostering Adoption would send through pictures of children. They were black and white photographs that would come through a fax. She'd say, I'm sending you through some children now. And the fax would start whirring. And these sheets of paper would come through and I'd feel nothing.
Yeah.
I'd see grainy pictures and I felt nothing, except for quite guilty and bad about not feeling anything. And then a picture of 2 little girls came through the fax. And I said, oh my God, this is them.
How did you know that?
Their pictures, their faces. And I just thought, no, this is them. And because we had decided that we would adopt more than one.
Yes.
So these were siblings from the same birth mother.
At that moment that you knew these were going to be your children, do you remember what that feeling was in that moment?
Such excitement.
Oh, okay.
Such excitement. I just was so excited. The change now is that you don't see photographs. You just find out what the child is like.
Yeah.
But you don't get the photograph until after you've gone further down the line.
Wow.
So we were very taken in by these photographs, or this photograph.
And did your husband feel the same way?
Yeah, he did. And their names, everything about this piece of paper with the grainy photograph and their names. Yeah, that's what did it.
And when they became part of your family and they were actually in your home as your children, do you remember your feelings then, the first experience?
Yes. I remember when we drove to the foster carer's house where they were, absolute excitement, really, really nervous, really excited. And then we went to the front door of the foster carer's house, knocked on the front door, and we could hear them say, they're here, they're here.
Wow.
And then we saw them. It was very weird.
Yeah.
Because it's not a photograph anymore. It's 2 live human beings. They were 4.5 and 5.5. We'd had a bit of background about them, but not that much. But a bit of background that their birth mother had been alcohol dependent with Lily, our older child, and they'd been very badly neglected. They'd been moved quite a few times, but they were now with this foster carer, and they were doing quite well. But then suddenly, it's a reality.
When you have that moment of taking responsibility for something you've chosen like this, because I'm guessing at that point there's no backing out, right?
No.
It's like giving birth.
I think people do, but no. But there's no way I would have.
Yeah.
No way. But I think people do. And I think if they do, it's okay, actually. If it feels terribly wrong, or if it, and people do back out, then yeah, it's okay.
Now, jumping forward, obviously this is a long time ago now. And I know from knowing you all through this time that obviously it's been a mixed experience for you. in many ways. For the sake of people listening, could you give me a kind of a summary of the whole experience?
It's been a complete and utter roller coaster. It's been shocking.
Yeah.
Parts of it have been incredible, but a lot of it has been very traumatic, not just for the children, but for us, because we took two sweet little girls who were sweet because, children are sweet, but who had suffered terrible trauma. What's really difficult is you get two little girls, two sweet little girls, and everyone's saying, oh my God, they're so gorgeous, they're so sweet, they're beautiful, which they are beautiful. They're so lucky to have you, and you must be so happy to have them. Now, the truth is, they're not lucky to have us because they're not lucky to have been removed from their birth parents, no matter how awful their situation was. Nobody should be removed from their birth family. I mean, what should have happened is that the birth family get loads of support.
Yes.
So for any child to be removed and then moved and moved and moved again, it's awful. So I wouldn't say it was lucky. If you spoke to the children, they might think, one of them will say, I'm really lucky. And the other one, who was so badly traumatized, won't know what she's thinking. So it was a mixture of delight, of having, new experiences with children and seeing that their joy the first time they, I remember taking them to the theatre to see The Lion King and watching their faces, seeing the animals appear in the show and thinking, these experiences they'll never have had in a million years from their background. They'll have never gone anywhere. They'll have never been on holiday. They'll have never been on a plane or a boat. Or they had so many new experiences that they would definitely not have had. But it's not really about the experiences. It's about feeling content and feeling safe.
We're talking obviously about the children because that's very, very important. But also, this is about you and your husband and your experience. And going back to that moment where you chose to do this was life-changing, obviously. For you personally, what do you feel you've benefited from in this process?
Yeah. It's difficult to say. It's difficult to say. I don't think I benefited. I think the girls benefited, but I don't think I did. Apart from knowing that I had done something, I've saved the state. We have saved the state thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds and taken two children into our homes that would have had probably a much worse life if they'd stayed where they were.
Yes.
But I'm not sure personally, because I've really sacrificed a lot.
I know, yes.
So I'm not sure.
Yeah.
When I see one of my girls and how well she's doing and what she's achieving, I know that she wouldn't have done that without us. Both have got major issues, and I'm still, they're going to be 24 and 25. They're still young for their age, and we're still doing so much for them. And sometimes it's very difficult to work out how it benefited in any way.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
is there anything, do you think, that could change the way you're feeling? Because I completely understand that you've gone through an enormous amount of trauma in helping these two young women now. And I think from the outside, I mean, this is naive of me to say, I would think, well, you've had the benefit of being a parent, you are a parent, and there were joys along the way. And I guess it seems sad that there isn't a greater benefit for you at this point. Is there anything that you think that would help you see that, if that's true?
No, I mean, it's difficult because it's only difficult to say, because we're still going through quite a lot with one of the girls,
Yeah.
Police issues, a lot of involvement with the police, a lot of involvement with mental health services. It's very difficult to say, oh, but, that's really nice.
Yeah.
Because that part of it is so unpleasant and not
No,
nice.
I completely understand that. Yeah.
But if you spoke to my other daughter, who looked out of the window when she arrived at our house, a few weeks after arriving at our house, and she looked out of the window and she said, I was meant to be here. And she's had that mentality for nearly 20 years. I think both girls love us. She is very appreciative and will say, I think I've benefited from her love.
Yes.
Because isn't that a wonderful thing that a child that you didn't give birth to can love you so much? And she's really affectionate, demonstrates her love, has turned out to be a wonderful person.
You are her mother.
So, I think obviously I've benefited from that.
Yeah.
I'm her mother, yeah.
Yes.
And when somebody says to her, where's your real mother? She'll say, excuse me, my real mother is, my birth mother is something else. So she will she's very, very cross if somebody says, where's your real mother? Or somebody says, don't you want to meet your real mother? Because her real mother is me, because I have done so much. And I think that's a benefit.
In your darker moments when, things are really, really difficult, do you ever reflect back and think, God, it would have been easier had we done sperm donor or?
No.
Okay.
And the very weird thing is I don't regret it, and I wouldn't have changed it. And I am dealing with some very difficult things, and it is like being part social worker, particularly with one child. But I wouldn't have changed it, because how would I have known?
Yeah.
I think when you adopt, what you don't really realize is that it's not the first few years that are the problem. It's when the children get a bit older, when they can understand what happened to them, and then they, reconnect with members of their birth family, that some of which we didn't know that they had, and then the problems arise. So I wouldn't have changed it, because I wouldn't have known that it's not just about having little children who are very sweet, yes, traumatized, but very sweet. You have got this for life. You've got the problems that they've got, because their problems are our problems. You've got that for life. And I know you've got that with any child, but it's quite different because you haven't given birth to them. So you haven't got, well, I think it comes, unconditional love comes because I'm still doing things that a lot of people have said, why don't you just turn your back on them, or one of them, and say no more? Can't, but I wouldn't, because I unconditionally love them now, despite the difficulties, I'd say.
Yeah. Well, Gina, your story is quite amazing. I think you're incredibly brave to tell it how it is and to give such a balanced perspective, because I know a lot of people want to put a very positive spin on adoption, and I know it's easy to get caught up in the romance of it and the excitement of it. And
it is, because just on one thing, what I would say is, before they came, I had so many different thoughts about what it was going to be like. One minute I thought it was, lovely, flowery, sort of rose-tinted spectacles. On the other side of it, I thought it's going to be dreadful. There's going to be shit up the wall. But what I didn't think is what it was going to be like in the middle of, like, everyday life, of dealing with traumatized children that would grow up to be traumatized adults.
Yeah.
Whose whole history would be with them all that time, and it would be you dealing with that history. And I think that is the same with every single adoption, because It's not just about the child, it's their history, it's their background. They are their background. They're not your background to begin with. And they're not, they become your background, obviously, as they grow up. But their background, their chaotic, disastrous start in life will carry on probably until they're middle age, maybe older, all their life.
Yeah.
And I don't want that to sound really negative, but I'm afraid that is true.
Okay, so I mean, with all that knowledge and experience that you have, if someone came to you now and said, I've got the possibility of doing egg or sperm donor or surrogate, all the different options that are there. I mean, obviously more now than there were 20 years ago. And they also had on their list there, but also I might adopt. What advice would you give?
My advice would be, you've got to want to do it more than anything else. It is not a replacement for not being able to have your own child. It's not a replacement. It's something different.
Gina, thank you so much for being so open in this conversation, because I think it's an enormously important area, particularly where people are struggling with fertility and they are looking at all the options available. And making the right choice is such a subjective, personal thing. And I think the more information, really honest, gritty information that you're giving us today is incredibly helpful. So thank you so much.
That's a pleasure.
And I wish you smoother waters as you go forward.
Thank you.
And congratulations on doing such a great job with your daughters.
Thank you.
Thank you. My next guest is Jack. Jack came to me, I think it must be almost 25 years ago now, or maybe 23 years. And he was my first ever patient that came to me who'd been diagnosed with azoospermia. That means basically no sperm. And obviously I treated him hoping that the acupuncture treatment and me looking after him would make some difference, but it didn't. And as you'll hear now in this interview with him, he's been on quite a journey to end up having two wonderful sons. I hope you'll enjoy this. Jack, good afternoon and welcome. And thank you. Thank you for joining me today to talk about choices around families, fertility, and so on. I'm really excited to hear your story because I think it really will help a lot of people that find themselves in a similar situation and maybe can't even imagine the outcome that you've had.
Sure, my pleasure.
Can I start by jumping straight to 1997 when you kind of started this journey? Can you just tell me exactly what happened there?
Yeah, sure. My wife and I had been married for about 5 years and, kind of put off having kids. We were both working in the arts and we thought, well, wait, we've always got time. We've got more time to consider this. My wife was then around 32, so early 30s. So we thought we still had some time. And, my wife, Kate, she really wanted to have children. So I thought, okay, let's, stop the birth control. And, so we gave it a shot for about 6 months. It wasn't working. My wife hadn't gotten pregnant. And then, I think I went to my doctor and he said, look, if you've been trying for 6 months, it's probably worthwhile to look and see if everything's working properly. And they generally start with the men. Having had some tests done before I'd left for Mexico, I came back and I got this diagnosis that I had a 0 sperm count.
Wow, that's quite a diagnosis for a young man.
Yeah, it was shocking. I think I'd always imagined having children and I've always been really healthy. I just never imagined that something like that would happen. So it was kind of new ground. And it was interesting. When I went to the doctor, I remember the doctor very clearly saying to me, look, a lot of people are going to say you can try all these different methods. My advice to you is just forget it. It's unlikely that anything is going to change this. And just get on with, if you want to have children, start exploring other ways of doing that. I must say I absolutely disregarded that advice because I think there was always, I always just thought, well, maybe there's a way.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
It wasn't an easy thing to immediately give up on.
Do you remember how it felt when you got that news?
Yeah, it was kind of like one of those trapdoor moments, where you just think, oh, and then you sort of end up down the chute in a completely different world. And I think it was especially hard for me because, I never really felt like I belonged in the family that I grew up in. And the idea that I wasn't going to have kids going forward just made me feel like I was going to be on this island of nowhere.
Yeah. And then obviously you've got to go home and tell your wife. who really wanted to have kids, right?
Yeah, and I think the strain on the relationship, and again, you think like we had sort of agreed to have kids, and it's always been a part of our conversations when we got together. And then suddenly we're facing a completely different reality. We had a pretty strong relationship, but it just casts everything in a new light, and you start to think maybe this is never going to happen, and maybe this is it. And I think that was shocking for both of us.
Do you remember the conversation with her when you told her?
I think we sort of got the news together. I think it was one of those opening up the envelope moments, and you think. I remember where I was. I remember we were in the kitchen of the house we were living in at the time, and it was like, oh my God, it is just really shocking. And she said something that I thought was at the time was very unsupportive, and I just thought, oh, maybe this is going to be the end of the relationship. Maybe this isn't going to be able to continue in this new reality. And that was really shocking. It's like, oh, so this is not just going to be a fork in the road of children, but it's going to be in the fork of the road of the relationship as well. And that was really hard.
A lot of the men that I've worked with who've had the same diagnosis, one of the big things they talk about is that kind of male ego that, that we're here to procreate and that we're supposed to carry our line. And that seems to be the first knee-jerk response to the news. Was that at all true for you?
Yeah, I think there's a part of that. I think there's sort of flashes that I remember really strongly. At the time, we were in the process of buying a flat. We were buying a flat from this couple. Funnily enough, the man was Mexican. Mexico plays a prominent role in this story. Yeah. And the woman, his partner, had just gotten pregnant, and they were about to have a child. And I remember him visiting in this flat, and him talking to a friend of his. And he said, "Well, yeah, I'm having a child. I've proven my masculinity." And I just went, oh, God, oh, my God, oh, fuck. I failed the masculinity test.
Yeah.
And, the other thing is when you tell people that you're infertile, like half the people say, oh, that means you can't have sex. It's like, no. Yeah. So then you have to go into this awkward sort of explanation thing, which again is like, God, do I really have to get into this? And there's definitely a little bit of like residual shame around that, I think, as a man. I don't think that hit me quite as bad as it hits other people, because I think being a creative person, strong feminine side, maybe I'm not too allied with that masculinity. But I know when that guy said, I've proven my masculinity, I thought, oh, shoot, I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to be able to prove my masculinity. And it's those things that kind of stuck in my mind and have stuck in my mind since then.
Now, you went on from this to then doing sperm donor.
Yeah.
Can you just tell me a bit how you got from being told you have nothing to moving to that?
Yeah, so I sort of held out for some hope. I looked at alternative therapies. As you know, this is how we met originally, trying to stimulate sperm production in other ways. I had a testicular biopsy, again, not a barrel of laughs, where they basically slice off a chunk of your balls to see if they can find any sperm there. That came up with absolutely nothing as well. And I think it was at that point, Gerad, that I thought, okay, this isn't going to happen through me. I am not going to bring the genetic material to have a child. And I think at that point, for me, it just became a creative act. I thought, well, what do I really want? Do I really want to have my child, or do I really want to have a child? And I think this is where for me, it was much easier than for other people, because I wasn't absolutely obsessed with having my own child. And as well, I think this is where not having a strong connection to my birth family actually paid dividends, because I never had this feeling like, oh, I have to carry on the line. This is my parents, and I'm carrying on their lineage. I thought, oh, great, I get to cut myself off from all that shit from my childhood, and that will never be born further. So I think that made it a little bit easier. But actually, as I say that, I think there's probably a lot of rationalization in all of this.
Yes, look, I think it's a very difficult thing to accept. It's such a primal thing.
Absolutely, it is primal, and I think it's just something that you just don't expect. And I had lots of kind of memories of my childhood, and where I grew up in New York. Our next door neighbors, they were a coupleless child, and it was like, oh yeah, George and Margaret could never have children. And I thought about all these people who just kind of had to accept that, who didn't have an option to somehow do this in another way. And our next door neighbors were always really kind to my brother and I. And, in reflection, I thought, oh, I see. We were sort of like as close as they were going to get to children. And obviously living in a time where you could choose plan B, I was very grateful for that.
So this space between, trying to see if you can do something about your diagnosis and then eventually going on to do sperm donor, what was the process in the discussions with your wife and with yourself?
I think literally, I can remember I went to a clinic to have this testicular biopsy done. And when I got the result, I just thought, okay, that's it. That's it. I'm going to close the door on that. I think my wife really wanted to have kids. Again, she wasn't particularly bothered where they where they came from. I know that sounds blithe, but I think we were really, obviously we had a lot of discussions around this time, just that we really wanted to be parents, and where and how it happened didn't really matter.
Did you consider adoption before this?
Not at that moment in time. No, we just thought, I think my wife really wanted to carry a child, wanted to give birth to a child, and that was really important to her, and somehow that seemed like the next best thing.
Now, again, a lot of men that I've spoken to at the beginning, and often it continues, this idea of another man's sperm impregnating the egg. I mean, some almost ideas of like a betrayal in some way, or did that ever cross your mind?
Not at all in any kind of way. I think it was just for me, it was like a means to an end. And there are these moments where you go to the donor place and they say, well, how tall are you? What sort of eye color is? And you try to match. And I just thought, wow, this is they're just going to pull a lot out of a freezer somewhere. But it didn't matter. It didn't really matter to me. I thought, this is potluck. Life is full of a lot of series of chances, sliding doors that take you in one place or another. And I didn't have any issue with that. I didn't feel like it was a betrayal. I think at a certain point, all that poking at my masculinity, I think I just closed the book on that, to be honest. I think I just moved on.
Well, that's brilliant.
Or it's fortunate, What I want is a family, and there's a way to do that my wife is still, absolutely involved in. We're going to give birth to a child. And yeah, it's not my contribution, but it's mystery date. It's the ultimate mystery dance,
And when it came to choosing the donor, even if you weren't that concerned about it looking like you, or was there an easy path to making that choice?
Well, you don't really choose. This was through the NHS, so they choose for you. So
okay.
I just assumed he was going to be a medical student. And to be honest, I'm glad that I didn't choose that, because I think this whole designer baby thing, that would be like a lot of responsibility.
Okay, good. And that went on to the birth of your son. How was that for you?
Yeah, it was great. When my wife became pregnant, when she carried it to term, it was like, wow, this worked, and I'm going to have a child, even though I'd faced the possibility of never having that happen. And, I was just incredibly grateful. I think, the whole donor process was brilliant. People were really understanding. They were supportive. I must say, I always had this image of some medical student jacking off in a stall somewhere that I could never quite get that, and collecting this. And that was the beginning of my son. But that was fine. I suppose I just cast my imagination to how this happened. But the birth of our son was great. It was a difficult birth. My wife ended up having a cesarean, kind of emergency cesarean. And it's just a wonderful moment. And I think, when a baby comes into the world and you're responsible for it, but there was no question for me, like, is this child mine, or am I going to bond with this child? I mean, I never had like a moment of doubt about that. I thought, I signed up for this, I enabled this, and this is it.
How transparent were you with family, friends, and your wider community that it was a donor?
Yeah, absolutely transparent with everyone. And I think what was interesting, also in the process of going through the donor process, and as I said, people respond in different ways. People try to counsel you, I suppose, say whether they would feel comfortable doing that. I think people have a different level of understanding, but we were absolutely upfront and told our child immediately, before even the point of cognition. And I think with our son Django, I think the way we originally framed it is we just gave this donor a name. Now, I think I chose the name Angelo because I just thought, well, it was like an angel, and it's like this is what happened, and that was, I suppose, personifying it in that way. Just imagining someone was a little bit easier to explain it. And I think just because he grew up with it, there wasn't like an announcement date. It was just normal. I mean, I must say, there's like kind of like, who do you tell and who do you not tell? And I can remember being at dinner with some friends who obviously didn't know that Django was a donor child. And, they said something like, oh, he looks so much like you. And I was like, well, I'm not his father. And, that's sort of this introducing this element. And I mean, we're quite open with it. It's not like we necessarily volunteer the information now, but it's kind of just normalized.
Do you remember how Django responded once Django was old enough to understand what you were telling him? Do you remember how he dealt with it?
He just sort of rode with it. I don't remember there ever being a kind of shock moment for him. And I think he talked about it openly. And I think he probably at a relatively young age maybe overshared that a bit. And I think he struggled as well with that. Who do I tell? And who, because some people find it absolutely shocking. Like, your parents did what? You're what? And obviously being a young man growing up, there's opportunities to be teased for that or to be labeled as different. But I think he just kind of rolled with it. He's never talked about it being awkward. And I think he faces that same decision about who he tells and when he tells people. And obviously, there's this other mystery data. Is, does he want to find the guy who's his biological father? He has expressed, not really an interest in doing that. And you know what? Whatever he decides to do would be fine with me. I think it would be fascinating, actually, for him and me to go and, if he was interested, to go and meet the guy. But if he's not interested in that, I'm not going to push that. But I have no insecurity around that. I suppose I've always really believed in the nurture a little bit more than nature. Maybe a little bit less now. So I just thought, you know what? I'm going to give to this child everything I give to him, and he's going to take that. And he carries this genetic material from whoever Angelo was. And there's always a little bit of mystery around that. And I think he seems fine with that.
So moving on a few years, then, of course, then you had your second son. And this is where this story does become very interesting.
The story. So my wife became pregnant again. We had another donor a few years later, another donor experience, which was a lot harder. It's a lot harder for her to get pregnant the second time. So originally, it's the same batch. So Django is now going to, in theory, have a sibling. So, same process, same experience, except it was really hard for her because her fertility was declining at that point. And she got pregnant, and then so there was a time when we thought, oh, okay, so we're going to have another child who, again, is related to our older child and is obviously a child of Kate's as well. And then she had a miscarriage, which is really painful, really, really painful and difficult. And after that, wasn't no longer able to get pregnant again.
Right.
The interesting thing about this is that, in a way, this kind of leveled the playing field because, okay, so I had fertility issues and now my wife had fertility issues as well. So it's like, okay, so we're both out of the picture in this case. And I think it was also hard because I had originally put off having children. And I think my wife was quite angry that she'd sort of lost her window of fertility. So that was another awful ingredient in the mix. And I still feel guilty about that, to be honest, that I was sort of the one delaying the having children, and that meant that her window of fertility closed sooner than we could have a second child in. So that was really challenging.
So having that experience now, would you say to younger people to get on with it based on what you're saying there?
I don't know. I don't feel like I'm in a position to advise people. I have had conversations with friends who have had fertility issues, and I've said to them, look, just have a child. It doesn't matter how you get it. Just have a child. And I know there's been quite a bit of resistance around that. I think I've met other men who really struggle with that notion. And I was trying to say, look, it doesn't matter if it's a donor child. It doesn't matter if it's an adopted child. Like the point is to get the kid and be a parent. And I noticed the resistance of that in others.
So after the miscarriage,
my wife and I turned to adoption because we thought, okay, we didn't imagine a one-child family. Neither of us grew up as a single child, never imagined that. And we thought, okay, so now we've done plan B. Now we have to go plan C. And, adoption at that time, this is in the early 2000s, very, very difficult for white couples like my wife and I, because at that time there was a limit. You could only adopt children within your own ethnicity. And this has completely changed in recent years. So we're two white people living in Britain. And we live in Brixton, which is an absolutely mixed neighborhood in London. So everyone around us here is every color you can possibly imagine, but we can only adopt a white child. And again, we had a young child, and the theory of adoption is you have to adopt a child that's younger than your existing child. You don't want to bring an older child into that. And so it was really challenging for us to find and be accepted for adoption and to be able to be granted a child who was younger than our child.
How old was Django at this time?
Well, I think when Kate had her miscarriage, Django would have been around 3, 2.5, 3. When we gave up, he was in 3 or 4. So we're looking at a younger child, and it took a long time. It took a long time to. So we went with Quorum, again, great organization, facilitating adoption. We went through the whole approval process. That was fine. Obviously, we had a child, so we had some chops, around raising a child. So we were pretty confident in the sense, in our elder child, we obviously hadn't dropped him or killed him, or, he seemed to be reasonably well adjusted. It was just very difficult. And I think at one point we started looking at adopting from the US because I'm American, and it just seemed very complicated. And then we were offered a child, a baby who was 3 months old. And again, this was such a different experience because there's a whole history around that. And what we were landing ourselves in was a much larger scene, let's say. So our adopted son came to us when he was 3 months old. He was initially fostered because his mother was in prison. After he came to us, we took him to Holloway every week to visit her.
Wow.
Because that was the part of the process. In fact, there's this fabulous photo. I don't know, the social worker said, "Oh, hold him up. Hold up this baby in front of the sign, HMS Holloway." It's like, really? Okay. So
wow.
There was a chance that his mother, when she got out of prison, would be granted custody. I mean, to be honest, I don't think that was really on the cards because she was in prison for arson. She had had a series of children that had been taken away from her. She had a crack habit. So there wasn't really any chance that she was going to be granted custody of the child. And when she did get out of prison, we were also supposed to have contact with her, but she never came. Again, so this is this bizarre experience of taking this child to visit its mother in prison and then sort of going through the motions. And even after she got out of prison, there was always the option that if some other family member had turned up willing to take our child, Alfie, that he would have gone back to a family member. So there's a little bit of uncertainty around this. So he was born in Holloway. He was taken into foster care for 3 months, and then we visited his foster care. And there was just this day where we went to St. Albans on the train and picked up this baby and brought it back to our house. And it really felt like a kidnapping. I still have this picture of being on the train platform, wheeling this baby away. And it's like, is this right? Is this okay? Is this...
Yeah, incredible.
So again, and then, you welcome this child into your family, and then it's obviously a lot of uncertainty around his past. His mother had been using cocaine in the first few months of her pregnancy with him. So there's that health insecurity around that. He had 7 older siblings, same father, same mother. And so you get cast into this cast of characters, and, which I absolutely agree with. We, were in contact with them, and we would take Alfie to hang out.
Were his siblings also adopted?
Yeah, so the 3 eldest ones were in long-term foster care. The next 2 were adopted, and then there was one more who was also adopted in a separate family. So the 3 eldest ones were together. There was a pair that were together that were adopted, and then there was another one. And the sister who was next eldest to him, the couple who had adopted her were offered Alfie, which is so weird. Like, this child that's come to you was actually offered to someone else, and they declined to take him. So again, and then his mother subsequently got out of prison, had another child. So there's this, it's just an amazing kind of like inherited family. And later, when our son Alfie was older, people would ask him, how many siblings do you have? And he would go, he couldn't answer the question because it's like, what do you mean? Do you mean the person I live with, my half brother or whatever, Django, who's, my brother, I think of as my brother, or this cast of characters spread out in various locations in and around London?
Do you remember how Django kind of took this whole new part of his life on? Because having already been told he's a donor baby and then to have an adopted brother, there's quite a lot for a child to take on.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in a way it was easier for him because he was also abnormal. It's just like, okay, I'm unusual. I'm not Joe normal. Okay, now I've got this adopted brother. And I think he always wanted a sibling. He wanted a brother. And that was one thing that was driving us in adopting, besides this idea of just having a family that contained more than one child. So he was very welcoming. And at that point, because so much time had gone by, he was 6. So he was a lot more aware of things. And I think he just, kids are amazing. They just roll with what happens.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, adopted brother. Okay. Oh, 7 siblings. Okay. That's what we're doing now. And I think that flexibility, it's a lesson for us as grown-ups to learn from.
How did your relationship, your marriage, deal with all of this? Because this is an enormous amount to handle. Apart from the normal relationship joys and discomforts.
Yeah, I think it's challenging and it's a creative act. And I know that even before my wife, Kate, and I were trying to have children, I said to her, listen, let's go into couples therapy and let's get straight with each other. Let's really try to straighten out as much as possible, because I look back on my own childhood and my parents were a bit of a mess. And I didn't want to bring a child into an environment where the relationship, the couple relationship was uncertain, or where there were just like dirt in the corner, messy stuff in the corner. So I think that investment that we made in therapy and also just going through this process of infertility, having support around that, having support around unusual family, and giving attention to the relationship was really, really important and really valuable through that. And I think just having a family is always going to be an act of creativity for parents, however kids come into the mix, right? It's going to force you as a couple to change your relationship. It's going to deepen it. It's going to enrich it. It's going to divert it. I think the important thing is just to stay really, really connected and to talk about all the feelings around that. And I suppose, I was fortunate in that my wife never felt that, if she did feel it, she never expressed it, that I was somehow diminished as a man because I couldn't, impregnate her. And I think that would have been really hard.
Yeah. Now your sons are grown men, both of them, right? And so the 4 of you stand as adults together. How united do you feel in spite of the differences from the conventional kind of setup?
I don't see any difference, really. I don't see, when I look at other people the thing is, you see other people and their kids really look like them. And you think, I see that, I get that. And, the funny thing is sometimes people say, oh, your sons, they really look like you. It's like, well, that's just, chance. I don't think it really makes a difference, to be honest. I think we've been cheek by jowl with each other for all of these years together. And, there's been push and pull. And I think one of the challenges of adopting a child is your child always has the opportunity to say to you, well, you're not my real parents. And it's like, yeah, you're right. On one level, you're not. Yeah. And, it's just the way kids wind you up. Like, kids are always going to find a way to wind you up. Our younger son, Alfie, would say to us, you're not my real dad. You can't tell me what to do. It's like, well, that's sort of kind of true. And I said to our son, Alfie, look, his father passed away when he was 3. And I went to his dad's funeral. And that was really important to me because I thought, I'm now his dad. And when his dad died, at age 39, I thought, I'm going to be there. I'm going to talk to his friends. I'm going to be the person carrying this back to him because I'm going to hold that for him. I'm going to represent his birth dad in whatever way possible. And, we've also said to him, he's turned 18 now. If he wants to find his mom, she's out there somewhere. She's probably a mess. If that's something that's important to him, I think at this point, he's 18, he gets to make his own decisions. But I would go with him. I would go with him and say, yeah, look, here's the picture. Let's, because I think The hardest thing with these things is the mystery of it. And this is why with our elder son, I said, look, you want to go find the donor? Let's go find the donor. We'll have a drink or dinner if he wants to meet, Let's draw the map in whatever way we can. And just so, because I think it's the unknown things that haunt us.
Can I ask, you have fully embraced the reality of the two ways that your sons have come into your life.
Yeah.
Just in the way that you've been so transparent from the beginning, and you've been very open with your children. And as you say, you'll do anything to help them if they want to look further. What is it in you, do you think, that enables that to happen? What seems to be so peacefully and enthusiastically?
I think it's, on one level, it's security, like a secure sense of who I am and being comfortable with that. And I also just think I'm curious just like they might be curious. If my son, our elder son, Django, if he went and found his, the donor and found this incredible bond with him and like hung out with him, I'd be like, great, so cool. That's something else. I just wouldn't feel threatened by that because I know what I've offered my children. Whatever they've taken, and so be it. The thing about not being a biological parent is there's this lack of ownership, which is kind of, in a way, quite liberating. Like all you are is people together who grew up together. There's not this sort of genetic link. So I think that's probably it. And also I just think, if you're curious, I'm curious as well. Wouldn't it be cool?
Now, you've obviously only had your own experience of this, which is absolutely valuable. There are people I know that have used donor sperm and donor egg, and their children don't know, and they're now young adults. And obviously with the way that things are changing with genetic testing and so on, it becomes difficult to know what to do at that point. Do you have any opinion on that or guidance that you might give someone in that situation?
I think I would just say, look, what is the cost of holding that secret? What's the intention behind holding that secret? Is it an act of protection? Is it an act of protection for you? Is it an act of protection for the child? I would just recommend being really upfront about that. And I think the reason we told our kids everything is that we didn't want to hold that secret, and we just felt like it would be a betrayal not to share that. Let's talk about the reality here. Let's not pretend. So I think what I would say to those people is it's not too late, and just to ride with what happens. And to believe that even if you haven't told them, what you've built with them is so valuable. And all that links and all that connection cannot be undone. Find a way of explaining the intention behind waiting to tell them. And it may be an intention that is driven by love or protection or caring or kindness, and to frame that in a positive way. Or it could be fear. It's like, I was afraid to tell you. I think that's fine. I think just really check in with yourself about your motivations and your intention around that, and come clean.
Yeah. Times have changed. In 20 years, there are many donor children in the playground now. So I think it's easier for people these days. And that's why I find it quite incredible the way that you've always been very open and courageous in the way that you've dealt with all of this. Do you have people come to you and ask for your advice on this subject, seeing as you are such an advocate for it?
Yeah, I think, on the side of adoption, I think it's really, really important to help people really understand what they're getting in for. I have a friend who has an adopted child, and she always says, look, if anybody told us what this was going to involve, we would never have done it. So I think going into that, I think adoption is a bigger thing than donor, or at least it's because there's so much more mystery. There's so much more baggage inside of that. Maybe it's not for some people, but I felt that. And I think I always say to people, look, just get the kid, forget how, just get over it. Get over the pain and the misery and the suffering of realizing that you cannot be a biological father. Work through that, whatever way that's going to work for you. Come to grips with that and move on, because I just keep saying, it just doesn't matter to me. I really don't care.
Well, Jack, thank you for that. I think that's a great way to end, because I think for a lot of men listening to this, and there are a lot of men, it's an increasing problem. And a lot of young men, particularly young men, are having to deal with this in a very private way. So I think, hearing that from you is incredibly helpful. And women too, of course. Thank you, Jack.
You're welcome.
Listening to these two interviews has been quite challenging for me personally. I actually went down the adoption route with an ex-partner. We very much wanted to become parents, and we looked at all the different ways that was possible, and the adoption route was the obvious one for us. It was a challenging process, and hearing Gina's account of what she went through reminded me of how difficult it can be. I actually went to Gina and asked her advice. And I remember at the time that she was very clear. She said, on many ways it's wonderful, but it's also very hard. And it was actually her advice at the time that prevented us from going any further. So it was quite, yes, personally challenging and interesting to hear Gina speak and to hear the whole story in a way that I hadn't heard before. Jack, of course, his story was somewhat different in that by the time he went down the adoption route, he already had a son from sperm donation. And it was great to hear how he really didn't have any kind of differing feelings about the sperm donation or adoption, and how clear it was that for him, the most important thing was that he was a parent of two boys. And as you can probably hear from the interview, it's been a fantastic outcome. My final guest is Leon. Leon, I have never met before. He was suggested for this podcast because of his interesting story and his clear reflections on being adopted. I hope you enjoy listening to him. Good evening, Leon.
Good evening, Gerad.
And thank you so much for coming on this evening. Well, the subject we're going to talk about is adoption. And I know that you've already listened to two of the interviews that I've done with two of my former patients. And why don't we start by just telling me a little bit about your background, your story, and why you're speaking with me tonight?
So I was actually adopted at the age of 8 years old, and my sister was adopted at the age of 6. And we were quite late in terms of the adoption process because most families like to adopt at a much younger age, so the kid doesn't really know kind of too much about their previous life, but they just know about what their future life's going to be. Some of the kids don't really know anything at all, to be honest with you. But myself and my sister Carla, we were in foster care for about 3 years. So I was 5 to 8. And before that, I was obviously living with my birth mother. So realistically, it's one of those things where you're traveling around all the time. You're going from school to school, town to town. I was born in a place called Halifax in West Yorkshire. And my sister was born in Rochdale. So we lived like all over the place. I think it was social services and councils were booting us out of places every 2 seconds. So there was no stability there. It was really, really difficult, actually. And along the way, we had some traumatic experiences as well.
Was this just with your birth mother or a family? Or
Yeah, just with my birth mother, but I think she had like different partners here and there. My birth mother had me with one guy, and then my sister with an Irish guy. So I'm mixed, like half Asian, half English, with a little bit of Irish thrown in. My sister is half like English, half Irish. So we had the same one, different fathers, really.
Right.
So that's another way where you can say things weren't stable either, because she had like different men in the house a lot of the times, and she was heavily on drugs as well, on heroin. So her choices weren't too great.
Yeah. And do you know if she was using drugs when she was pregnant with you, or was that something that happened later?
Yes, I believe so. From the social worker that I had at the time, she did actually say that my mum kind of cut down on the drugs with me, but with my sister, kind of all hell broke loose, and she just like actually took a lot of different substances, and it was mainly heroin. So that was obviously one of the worst drugs out there. And with Carla, like Carla was born and she was very heavily brain damaged. Like I had a little bit here and there, and I would say it. Growing up with this type of thing, it meant that I was a little bit behind my years in terms of my mental age. So, at the age of 33 now, I'm not a real 33-year-old. I still feel I'm like 5, 6, 7 years behind, like everyone else, and so it has affected me going into my adulthood. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Were you, as a child, were you aware that you felt behind other kids?
As a child, you're just a child. Like you don't, you're just playing like a normal kid. But then as you start going into primary school, secondary school, you start feeling then you're behind. Everyone else is in a Ferrari and you're in like a little Ford car. Like, you go really slow down the motorway all of a sudden. And as soon as I hit year seven, my teachers were a little bit worried about me because I was falling behind and I wasn't able to grasp certain things. And I have a little bit of potentially like autism as well. Like, I'm a little bit on the spectrum, I think there. And it was just a little bit difficult for me. But that's because, from the ages of 0 to 8 years old, I didn't really have much of an education. So I actually got adopted in London, into a very nice family.
Okay.
And that was the beginning of my education. So I wasn't reading books, I wasn't learning my alphabet and everything else. I came out of primary school with, back then it was a level 443, and that was a struggle just to get to that stage, actually. So my sister was way off the charts in terms of what she could do mentally. And, she went into different private schools, had private tutors, all sorts of help. But it didn't really help, to be honest, because the child's brain is important, I'd say, up until the age of like 3, 4 years old. If their brain is not functioning properly, then they're going to really struggle, I think, as they get older.
Yeah. So the situation with your mother did social services step in and remove you from her, or
Yeah.
what was okay?
Yeah, definitely. I think there was a few warning signs, sort of signals, I would say, where, she had to abide by certain rules by taking us to school. I don't remember going to school that often. I remember just like staying in our flat that we were living in this big high-rise building. And I remember going to school literally on a handful of occasions. And that's obviously a warning signal right there for teachers that, these kids, that they're probably not getting fed at home properly either. So that was quite difficult, actually. But I didn't really think of it at the time. It's like, oh, I should be in school type of thing. Yeah, it was one of those things that you just sort of go with the flow when you're that young, because you're just young and innocent.
Do you remember when you realized that you were going to be leaving your mother? Do you remember what happened around that time?
Yeah, so I left my birth mother when I was 5, and then we were in foster care in a place called Salby Bridge in West Yorkshire. We went to live with them for about 3 years. And when I was 5 years old, I don't fully remember actually leaving her personally. I just remember that, we're going to a house to be away from her for a bit. And that's all that I actually kind of knew. And then it kind of sunk in shortly after that I would be, not seeing my mum anymore. And I don't think I actually saw her in that 3-year period. And I'm not really too sure if she wrote to us or not. But, from where we lived to where we were living with the foster family, it wasn't too far away. It was in the same sort of county and stuff like that. But to be honest with you, that was something which I kind of didn't think about at the time until I got like a little bit older and I actually got adopted. And that's when I think I felt a little bit sad, because I was like, oh, where is my mom? Like, what's happened to me? Why have I moved from West Yorkshire to London all of a sudden? Is my mom still alive? Like, what's going on? And I found out when I was about 15 years old, when we tried to track her down, that she actually, she did pass away from a heroin overdose in the bath. And I honestly, I think I cried for about like 2-3 minutes. I was eating an ice cream at the time and I was just crying my eyes out. And then I stopped crying and I was like, it's done. And I was like, it's so disrespectful for me to cry when all she did was bring a lot of harm to me and my sister. And my adoptive mom was the one that brought us up and gave me an education and gave me a life and stuff like that. So I also then thought about it from an ethical point of view. And I thought, maybe her dying, she's at rest now. Like, she can't harm herself or any other babies or anything like that. So that's how I felt.
Yeah. I know that you listened to Gina's interview with me, and you mentioned that resonated in some way with you. What was it in particular that came up for you when you listened to it?
I think it was the bit where she said some really interesting things, but one of the main things was like, when you adopt a child, you don't know what you're getting. It's like a coin. It's like 50-50. And the other part of that was, oh, okay, the kid is fine for the first few years. And that was like my sister. She was fine until she hit teenage years. She was an innocent, lovable child. And then she just turned demonic and just crazy, and her brain started acting in a different way. Her surroundings, she became a product of her environment all of a sudden. These people from local council estates, she was just gravitating towards them, and they were up to no good and taking drugs, drinking, and all the other stuff. And that's kind of how my birth mother, spiraled out of control at some stage as well, that I would imagine. So one thing I got from it was, oh, you find to a certain age with the child, and then all of a sudden, their original family and their original DNA and everything just comes out of them. And I was like, oh my God, that is like Carla so much, because that's exactly what we had to deal with on a daily basis with her.
Yeah.
And it was very, very difficult to be with someone in your family who, they can't go to school, they can't think normally, they are behind on their years as well. And it just caused so much heartache for my adopted mum, actually, because my sister ended up hating her and wanting her real family back again. And that was really difficult, because you'd always get some lines like, oh, you're not my real mom, my real mom's dead somewhere, but she's much better than you, and I'm her daughter, type of thing. It was really difficult.
Do you remember how you dealt with it at the time?
At the time, I struggled to deal with it, but I tried to deal with it by blocking it out. When you're living in a bit of a hell house type of thing, with situations like that, where my sister was just getting herself arrested all the time for all the drunken, disorderly things that she was doing, it was very difficult. And I would always just try and block it out and just try and be outside the house a lot of the time, just try to see friends, this and that. But I think the one thing that I tried to do is I actually I went to university up here in Manchester. So I came from London, went to University of Manchester, and I honestly just went there because I was escaping a little bit. And I feel like a lot of people at university that you meet, they may look happy and stuff like that, but actually behind that book, they're running away from stuff as well. They're in their hometowns. So I actually felt like I ran away for about 3-4 years just to get away from all the drama and the chaotic situations.
Did you feel like you had to take some responsibility with your mom dealing with your sister?
Well, my mum saw me as being the golden child. So I tried to not misbehave and stuff like that. Like every kid that, they get up to stuff and when they're teenagers. But I tried to always do the right thing, and I could see how hard my mom was trying with her. And I tried to be that sort of shoulder to cry on, and I tried to show Carla the right way of living life, and that you need to show respect and everything else. But you'd have 1 or 2 good days and then 5 really bad days. Yeah. And a lot of the bad days could end up her being put in back of a police van for something that she's done. Whether it's her mental state that's not right, or the drinking, or the drugs and stuff like that. And that spiraled out of control from the age of about 14, where the little bit of disrespect and calling back turned into physical violence at times, her hitting my mom. She never hit me, never, but I had to restrain her quite a lot. And that was really sad. And I kept a lot of this away from my friends and, previous partners that I would have had at the time. It was very, very difficult for me to introduce anyone into my family home when I had stuff like that going on. It was really, really hard. And we lived in a very nice middle-class neighborhood in southwest London. And we would just almost talk at the street at times, because 90% of the time it was all quiet. And at 10%, people would be scared for their own families next door as to what was happening on the road where we lived in Earlsfield. Yeah.
Did your mom adopt the two of you alone, or was she with someone?
We have a father figure, Nigel, his name is, and back then, I don't know if it's different now, but you had to have a father figure in the picture, especially with 2 children. My sister's fully white. I'm obviously kind of half Asian skin tone, so we were potentially going to be separated. And the social worker at the time decided that, that was the worst thing to do. These kids had been through so much they have to be adopted together. It's very difficult to separate them. And the courts were like, we're still going to separate them. And Nigel then jumped in, and he was part of the whole process, honestly. And without him, it would be very, very difficult. They weren't like together as a couple necessarily, but he was there as a father figure, for many, many years of my life, and he still is as of today. I still treat him as a dad, really. He's given us a really nice upbringing. But one of the things from the court was, well, they're two different skin tones, so we're going to have to separate them. So Leon's going to probably have to go to like an Asian family. And the crazy thing is, like, my mum's brother, so my uncle, he's married to an Indian woman, and she's got 6 other siblings, and they're same skin tone as me. So my cousins are like my skin tone. So she actually had to fight that in court, and then they agreed to it. And obviously having the father figure, I think, really helps, because imagine her trying to adopt 2 children and you're just a single parent on your own. It'd be an absolute nightmare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you were listening to the interviews, could you relate personally to what they were saying?
I could relate to what Gina was saying in particular about the 2 kids, actually, and how they've come from a very like sort of traumatic background, and they're trying to get along in life. They're trying to be like a normal person, and it's just very, very difficult. And I could also understand what she was saying, how it was very hard for her in that interview, because now I understand how my adoptive mother was feeling. When she was dealing with me and my sister and all the issues, it was like that resonates with me a lot, actually, because when you're young, that your parents sort of work hard, but you don't always appreciate them. You don't appreciate all the hard work and effort they put in. And my adopted mom, she had IVF, and she really struggled to have kids, and she eventually had 2 kids, and they actually died at birth.
Wow.
On the same day that they were born, 12 hours apart, and that absolutely destroyed her. And this is a blessing in disguise for her to have Cara and myself in her life, actually. Because you don't always get that.
Yeah, that's so sad. How many years before she adopted you and Carla did she have the stillbirths?
I think it was possibly within 1 or 2 years, actually.
Wow.
I think it was that close. But I think in her head it was adoption. I think that was probably in the head before the IVF and everything. I think when you're going through failed IVF treatments, you're thinking about the adoption route anyway. It's not just one of those things like, oh, I'm just going to adopt 2 kids. It's usually you think about it a few years beforehand. And when she adopted her, she was about 44 years old. So, for her to actually bring up 2 kids and all that strength and energy you need, you're not a spring chicken. So realistically, 2 kids that are not your own is quite difficult there.
Yeah. Now, when you think back to your childhood, it's a very difficult childhood. Is it okay to say that it's difficult? I mean, without sounding naive, but
very, very, very difficult. Like I feel like now at the age of 33, just in the last like 3 to 4 years, I feel like I'm on the straight edge when it comes to life. Like I feel like I'm sort of going somewhere, that I'm actually at that real adulthood sort of stage, and that my career, I'm alongside everyone else in terms of life. But in my 20s, I think it was very, very difficult, and I was very people would look at me and think, oh, like Leon's a bit immature when I was in my teenage years, early 20s. But it was just because my brain wasn't fully developed for real life and real situations. I was still acting like a kid half the time. And that's just something which has dragged on for quite a lot of years, actually. But I feel like I'm ready and I'm there now. And that's the thing with adopted kids. The beginning part of their lives, they've had stuff taken away from them. They've had that happiness taken away from them. They've had that brain development and all the experiences that you get with it. I do remember, once I got adopted, like I was like, okay, I'm going to London to be adopted. And that was quite a scary thing for me. Yeah. I was like, okay, I'm not really too sure what London is and everything. But between the ages of 8 and 11 years old, I went to places like Disneyland in the US, in Florida, and all these other things. And I would never have had any of those experiences ever. because growing up on the council estate we did, everyone was hooked on to like heroin and stuff like that. Half the kids probably didn't go to school. It was almost below working class, the sort of place we lived in, actually. So I'm just, I thank God and my adopted mom and everyone that I'm at a stage in my life where I can actually tell a story like this, that I'm on the other side.
Yeah. No, it's wonderful to hear that you're a successful young man now, in spite of that, because I think it's easy to sometimes write people off because of the story of the past, that it is possible to come through.
Well, a really interesting thing when you talk about writing people off, people look at me and they see me and I might be looking happy and everything else, and they're like, oh, like, yeah, you're doing really well in life, but you don't know what's behind that. So, like, don't judge a book by its cover sort of motto that people say. And people from, some of that really working class places in Manchester that I pass on the tram quite often, I've had conversations with people like, oh, you don't know what my life is like, and we're really struggling this and that. And I was like, well, actually, I do. I've been on that side. Yeah. I've had that type of family, and I've always said to myself that if I ever had kids one day, I want to be financially stable. I'll make sure that I'm doing the best I possibly could for that child because of all the hardships that child's going to get otherwise.
Accepting that you're 33 now, right?
Yeah, I turned 33 in July. Yeah.
Okay, good. And you feel like you've come through something. What do you think you've learned from the whole experience? And that's a very broad question. But is there anything that stands out that you think, actually, there was a great life lesson here?
To be honest with you, I feel like people should always be given the opportunity to express themselves. I feel like people should be given that second chance in life as well, if they take it. I've been given, being adopted is like having that second chance in life.
Yeah.
And that's something which I haven't always grasped it, but I feel like now, as I'm getting older, I'm learning a lot about myself in my 30s. I got really depressed when I turned 30. I was like, oh my God, am I old? Like, what do I do now that I'm 30? Do I have a family in the next few years? Is my job like good enough financially, this and that? Like, am I living the life that I've been granted by moving to London and by being adopted? Like, it was one of those things where I'm always asking myself questions, but I'm always trying to better myself. And I feel like that's the one thing that I've grasped from this whole adoption process, that life is like in little mini chapters. So every year you're going to experience something that's completely different from your previous 20 years, but you're going to grow and get stronger, and your brain development is going to take you to a different level. I've been reading a lot about sort of philosophy and all sorts of stuff recently, to be honest with you. And that is just something which I think is guiding me a little bit more. And I'm really a strong believer in ethics and karma as well. And I believe that I'm actually getting very good karma in my life right now.
Mm-hmm. In what way? Can you give me an example how you see that?
Well, last year I landed one of probably the most professional jobs I've ever had in my life. I've spent years working in the hospitality and events and catering industry, and I've just been going from job to job, place to place, not really enjoying much of the work life, really. And I finally got a job where I'm working in marketing for a toy company in Rochdale at the moment. And I took that job. It's really quite far from where I live, but I took it because I was like, okay, it's a job, but I've really grasped it, and it's a family-run business, and I just feel like I'm enjoying going to work every day. I'm enjoying life, and I've been given a bit of a gift with that, because a lot of people have jobs and they just don't like it. They're working until they're 50, 60, and they don't really get much out of life. But I feel like things have clicked into place in terms of this last 12 months for me. And I'm using that as like a little platform to grow and get even bigger now as well.
Now, obviously, we've asked you to look at the whole past and you being adopted. How much on a daily, weekly basis do you actually think about that?
I think about the whole adoption thing possibly once every maybe like 6 months, maybe. Okay. Like I have like a real deep think about my life and think about, how lucky am I to actually be in this situation? Because I do remember my adopted mom. She actually she said that when she was choosing my sister and I, we were in a bit of like an Argos catalogue, and we were on page 5, I think we were, and you have all the pictures of the kids, and she just kept coming back to our faces, and she was like, Leon, there was like literally about 5,000 different kids in there, and you're just the chosen ones. So
Wow.
imagine how crazy that is. All those other kids, they just left almost like in a bit of a scrap heap somewhere. And so I feel honestly blessed, because if she didn't adopt us and, me moved to London and everything else, I have no idea if the adoption thing would have ever happened. Sometimes extended family members from your original family might try and take you in, and, you still might be dealing with the same issues over and over again. I do think that some of my aunties, my original aunties and my mom's mom, so my grandmother, I think they were kind of on drugs as well. So it would have been really chaotic, to be honest. Don't know if I'd be alive or in prison, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, it's wonderful that you can really see that and appreciate that, because it is an incredible opportunity, obviously, for both of you and your mother.
Yeah, it's like, honestly, it's the only description I can ever give it is like, like the lottery, like you won the lottery. I've won the lottery in life, I think. And the fact that my adopted mom did lose her 2 kids at birth, me and my sister, even though we were very difficult for her at times, it was like giving her a lottery win as well, giving her 2 kids that she never would have had.
It's wonderful to hear you with such an optimistic perception on it, because it could easily be another way. I understand also, sadly, your mother died. Is that correct?
Yes. So she died about 8 months after Carla passed away, and that was through cancer. So we knew that Carla was probably going to pass away before the age of 30 through her life choices. And, Carla died at the age of, I think she was like 24 when Carla passed away. And then, and my mom obviously died 8 months later. And that was really like a double whammy for me in terms of just the death process. Carla died in a very slow way. So in a way, when Carla passed away, I think I cried for literally 30 seconds when I got home and I found that she'd passed away. And then a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulder, because I've been carrying her weight for many, many years. And I was like, okay, she's at rest now. No one can harm her. She can't harm herself. And when my mom passed away, that probably killed me inside a lot more. And it still does. Like, I still think about it like quite often, because I was very, very close to her. She wasn't just a mom, she was like a best friend, like everything you could imagine.
Yeah.
So I do feel quite sad every, couple of weeks when I think about my mom. Yeah.
I mean, it's a huge amount of loss that you've had to go through your young life.
Yes, definitely. I'm still in a situation where I'm still grieving from it after all these years. But I'd say the first year after my mum died, I didn't really think about my mum that much, because it was just so hard for me. And as the years have gone on, you have a bit of a cry to yourself, when you're in the shower, when you're on your own and stuff like that. And I just think that, my life wouldn't be where it is now without her. So it is difficult. And it's something that you can never get over as well. You learn to sort of live with it.
Yeah. And your life now, are you with a good group of friends, a partner? How is your life now?
Yes, I've got a girlfriend up here in Manchester. She moved into my apartment here just under a year ago. And that's going well, that relationship.
Right.
I've got a small group of friends up here in Manchester as well, that live in the local area. I'm a big football fan, so I support Arsenal, and so I've set up a little group up here. I'm trying to piece everything together in Manchester as much as I can, because it's my new city now. So I moved here after my mum passed away, and I sold the family home. Manchester was obviously a place that I studied, so I was like, it's not like coming home, but it's a city that I knew. And it's still a city that is growing and developing with a lot of young people. Actually, people come from all over the world to live here. So I still feel like a tourist at times. And the other thing is, I'm trying to make it like my home for the future as well. And that stability, I think, is a really key important thing. If I did have a family one day, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to have your own family?
That's something that my girlfriend and I we've discussed quite recently. It's obviously been like quite 50-50 for me, maybe because of my experiences and I've seen what it's like from the being adopted and everything. So now it's very 50-50 in my brain. But having your own child, I think, is probably one of the most amazing feelings in the world for most people. I've obviously said to my girlfriend that if we couldn't have children, would we adopt? So she asked me, would we, be up for adoption? And because I know of how my sister was and how I was a little bit, I was always like, no to that question. And it makes me sound like a bit of a hypocrite because I've been through that myself, but it is 50-50 on what you get with a child and, that child not being your own and stuff like that. It does make things a little bit more difficult.
Mm-hmm. No, I completely understand that. It's very interesting to hear from your perspective because a lot of the people that I speak to, they do have these concerns. They want to do the right thing. They recognize there are children that need homes, but it's very difficult knowing what people know now that it can be difficult, as we heard with Gina.
Yeah, I think honestly, a quick thing about that is we have social media. You have people like yourself running podcasts. Back in 1998, when I got adopted, there was none of this social media and people being able to speak with one another from the other side of the world and tell stories and stuff like that. Like you didn't really have a lot of that. So this connectivity, I think, is a really powerful thing. People listening and watching your podcast in the future will get a lot out of these actually before making that decision.
Is there anything that you would say to prospective adoptive parents, having had this very personal experience? What would you say to a couple that were seriously thinking about doing it?
I would honestly say you've got to not just look at it like, when someone wants to become pregnant and they're like, oh, I want to have a baby. And they're like, oh, it's a nice, cute baby. But that baby turns into like potentially problems and mayhem later down the line because you lose control of that baby as it gets older. It starts making its own decisions. It's the same process when it comes to adoption. That kid is already programmed in such a way. You've got to really, really work hard and really want it for the long term. This isn't just a short-term fix that you think that, oh, yeah, it's going to be nice for a couple of years and we're going to be a nice, happy family, because it's not like that. It's not a Hollywood ending for some people. So you've got to really understand that it's a 20-year journey at least, and then another few years on top into adulthood, into helping them become what you want them to be. So that's what I would say. Look at the longer term picture and look at all the pros and cons and do as much research as you physically can. Go to focus groups, go to groups where you can speak to people about their personal experiences, not just from a young kid's point of view, but someone that adopted maybe 10, 15 years ago, because then you'll be able to make that right and informed decision.
Yeah, that's great. That's a really strong statement. And I think that's what people do need, what they want to hear, even though it may be uncomfortable, because as you say, kind of the Hollywood version is lovely. You pick the two babies up or one baby and off you go. So thank you so much, Leon. I really appreciate you coming on here and being so open with us. And I'm sure it's going to help lots of people hearing your story. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Adoption it's a very interesting area. And as we all know, things have changed over the years. It's not like the 1950s and 60s where women were forced almost to adopt their child because of social and cultural reasons. And I think it's very important to recognize that there is a big difference between taking a child that has not necessarily been affected by alcohol, fetal syndrome, or any other negative influences versus the kind of children that we find today who are in need of homes. What I think is fantastic about these interviews is it gives a lot of caution, it gives a lot of hope, and I really believe that it emphasizes the importance that adoption is not just another alternative to egg donation, natural conception, that it really is something that needs to be thought through. And I think, as Gina alluded to, it's at times a bit like an unpaid social worker. So I hope this is helpful for everyone. It certainly has given me a lot to think about, and has certainly helped me reframe the whole situation so that when people come to me for advice, I can give a much more balanced perspective. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for listening to the Power of Choice podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast and found it valuable, please consider subscribing, leaving a rating or a review. Do join me next time on The Power of Choice with me, Gerad Kite.